This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder, and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. My guest on the podcast today is one that anybody who is a craft beer fanatic, fellow brewer, home brewer, whatnot, anyone who has drunk a craft beer in the last 20 years surely knows. Greg Koch of Stone Brewing.
That makes me feel very important right now, that intro.
You know, I could have.
I'm going to play this for my mom.
Okay. I could have written a much longer and more flowery intro than that.
I don't think that would have been called for. No, that's great.
But that's a credit.
Thank you, though. Very kind.
That's a credit to your ability to get out there as an ambassador of craft beer, and that is one thing that you've been known for throughout your career of launching Stone and shepherding it through this kind of amazing growth phase, is building a story for people to connect to. Tell me how that plan for building this business came around, or was it simply just an organic development, and a natural extension of who you are?
Well, me and Steve Wagner, my partner who I started Stone with and who's still with us, a president today, it's definitely an extension of us. The beer styles are definitely extensions of our own personal tastes as well as the team. You never want to surround yourself with sort of yes men, if you will. But on the other hand, we have managed to surround ourselves with brewers who are like-minded when they're thinking about flavor profiles.
Yeah.
We have a range of perspectives, certainly, and take the benefit of that. But so the story, as I think you were trying to ask, came from, well, I've actually learned how to say it in 4 words. Beer Geek Gone Pro.
It's a common story across the industry.
It is.
For you, that scale is a little different than it is for most other brewers, and that Beer Geek Gone Pro is now a large brewery with 320 some odd thousand barrels of production last year, and new breweries and everywhere from Berlin to China to here in Richmond, Virginia, where we're talking right now.
Right. Let me pop in for clarity. We don't have a brewery in China.
Oh, okay. Just a tap room.
Tap room kitchen, yeah.
Okay. And so that story of growth has been a little different for you than it has been for some others of those brewers turned pro.
Sure. So one thing we've done over the years is we've pushed really hard. We've really leaned our shoulders into our passion, and have been admittedly aggressive at times in a variety of ways. Certainly with the flavor profiles of our beers, especially earlier on from the perspective of what was in the marketplace. But we felt this was us, and it's what we wanted to do. It's a voice that we wanted to have. It really has been organic over the years. If anybody would have told me that we'd be an international company, I wouldn't have seen it. I really wouldn't have seen it.
Yeah.
I can remember, heck, Steve and I got, I'm now recalling, we got a business coach kind of person to come in and talk with the two of us, maybe a year and a half, 2 years into it, when there was a lot of tension.
Yeah.
Between the two of us, we were having one of the tougher moments, because things were intense. It was difficult. The survival was in question.
Yeah.
And we were on edge, and we were working crazy hours. I was doing 6.5 days a week, 14 hours a day. That will wear on you.
Yeah.
So anyways, in this business coach, I remember he had us write down our personal goals for the brewery. And I can remember this one. This is one of them. And that was, we wanted to be the brewery that people would ask their friend or colleague or family member who was visiting Southern California to bring back home for them. That's what we wanted to achieve, a reputation that was outside of Southern California, but we didn't expect our beer to be available outside of Southern California. And that's why we had that, who would,
Right,
and they,
right.
so we were hoping that if, somebody was visiting from, any other state or region, that they would say, oh, Southern California, that's where Stone is. Could you bring me back some?
Yeah. It's a funny one. I was just listening on the drive down here from Washington, D.C. this morning to the Kim Jordan of New Belgium NPR interview on how we built this. And she mentioned a similar anecdote. They loved the fact that a liquor store in Telluride, Colorado, had a sign up in the liquor store that said, if you bring us back 10 cases of Fat Tire, we'll pay for your gas, to make that drive. And they're in the early days of craft beer. I mean, I think for craft beer consumers today, you take for granted just how accessible beer is. When you guys got started, I mean, it was hard to even get some of this stuff.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you kids these days, and by that I mean anybody who's turned 21.
Me kids. I started drinking when I turned 21 in 1995. So
yeah. I was going to say anybody who's turned 21 within, say, the last 18 years. Let's say since 2000, but especially since 2004.
Yeah,
14 years. Have never known anything other than this cornucopia of choice, which is really amazing. Now, you, having turned 21 in 1995, and perhaps, dare I say, maybe you had a beer before that?
Can neither confirm nor deny.
Yeah, well, I can confirm I was drinking beer before I was 21. But it wasn't any beer that I would be proud of or seek after today.
No, in college, I went to college in Memphis, Tennessee. And due to the crazy beer laws in Tennessee, I actually had to drive across the Mississippi River to West Memphis, Arkansas, to hit a small Walgreens liquor store just to get import beer or craft beer or anything, because if it wasn't stamped with the state of Tennessee on the cap, then they couldn't sell it in the state. And so, those were the challenges that we used to have to face just to get a hold of that craft beer.
You could count down a myriad of challenges. Yeah. And so, hey, I'll go back to you kids these days. You don't know how good you have it. Really. Because we've known, you and I and a lot of other folks, the older folks, will remember the dark times.
Sure.
And we didn't even know they were the dark times.
I think you can call them dark times, but I look at it in the same way that indie music flourished in the 80s and 90s, and I was in the punk and reggae and hardcore scene in the 80s and 90s, and at that point, you had to seek things out, and there was more work to find this, but it also felt more valuable when you did find it. And so it's an interesting world where you live in, where you can walk into any liquor store. I remember the first time I walked into a Liquor Mart in Boulder, Colorado, coming out of Tennessee.
That place is incredible. It's been incredible for so many years.
So 96, I go into Liquor Mart and it was just like a kid in a candy store. My eyes lit up. I couldn't believe that this supply of beer existed in one place all at one time. And now in many places across the country, that's just the standard lineup.
So let me give you a little perspective, because I'm off to Berlin tomorrow to celebrate our second anniversary there. And in Berlin, a city of 4 million people, I can name a half dozen places where you would have what we would consider to be a halfway meaningful beer selection.
Interesting.
And that would be kind of halfway meaningful beer selection. There would be 0 places that we would consider to be a fully no, I'm going to take that back, because there's Buterai and there's a handful of, those are the really, there's like 3. I'll get 3 places in a city of 4 million people. So now I'm going to go back to you kids in the United States don't know how good you have it in comparison to so many parts of the world, even, developed, beer-wise. Because nobody wants to argue that Germany isn't developed beer-wise, but we are so far beyond.
That raises an interesting question. One of the interesting things about your business with Stone is that you are a brewery, you are a hospitality business with restaurants and tap rooms that are public facing, and you're also a distribution business. When it comes to craft beer in Southern California, you're one of the larger craft beer distributors, and so How did that idea come about? I mean, obviously you're facing some commercial challenges. I mean, the easiest way to get, well, I shouldn't say it's the easiest way, but one of the most direct ways of getting your beer out there to consumers is to just tackle the distribution yourself. How did you end up in that distribution business?
Well, as far as tackling it ourselves, we had no choice.
Yeah.
There was no wholesaler that was interested in carrying our beer. When we started in 1996, halfway through that year, that's approximately the time when the first bubble burst.
Yeah.
Just after we started. And so it was an age when retailers were discontinuing brands, wholesalers were discontinuing breweries, and it was pretty rough out there for a while, and that's when we were born. So we didn't know a time when anybody was saying, "Hey, can we distribute your beer?" Nobody lined up and said, "Hey, I've got a growler. Would it be okay? Could I, be one of your first customers?" Nobody cared. It was, hey, craft beer was not a thing yet.
Yeah.
So because we had no other choice, we started off with a Ford Aerostar panel minivan. And we got a logo, vinyl logo cut out, put on the side of it, and we started delivering our own beer. But it nearly killed us.
Really?
Because, along with craft beer not being a thing, didn't only mean that no wholesaler was interested, but very few retailers were interested.
Yeah.
And really, not many consumers were interested. So the retail accounts that we could get, they were interested in maybe buying a case, 2 cases. I remember us trying to put a 3-case minimum on our deliveries so we wouldn't suck wind so bad.
Yeah.
And lose money with each delivery, and having so few retailers that were even willing to do that. And so so it was, I remember specifically, it was fall of 1997. We'd started again, delivered our first keg in end of July 1996. So a little more than a year. And we were at that point losing $20,000, $30,000 a month. And most of those losses were coming from the delivery side.
Really?
Because with every case of beer we would deliver, we would lose money. Every keg, we would lose money because we were so inefficient. There were no volumes.
Yeah, yeah.
And so we started, at that point, I'd become very proud of our connectivity with our retailers and our ability to understand and steward the quality of our beer in the distribution process. Because at that time, all the major brand wholesalers, all the wholesalers, had untemperature controlled trucks.
Yeah, yeah.
So in San Diego, we can get a little warm during the summer.
A little bit, yeah.
But we were bleeding dry. It was completely unsustainable. So I started talking to all the wholesalers, and one by one, they all said, "No thanks, no thanks, yeah, no thank you." And one wholesaler, at the time it was the Miller wholesaler. The wholesaler doesn't even exist anymore in San Diego through consolidation and changes. But they said, "Okay, yeah, we'll take your brand." This was in November of 1997. They said, "We'll start with you in December." That was the beginning of November. And then halfway through November, a couple of weeks later, they said, "You know what? Actually, December, too busy. It's holidays, Christmas time. Our salespeople are focused on incentives and, just driving the volume that we drive at that time of the year. We'll start with you in January." We're dying here. Okay, so halfway through December, we got a call and they said, "You know what? Actually, the Super Bowl will be in town in San Diego." And that was true. At the very end of January in 1998. Our team will be really focused on that because it's a big deal when the Super Bowl comes in town. All these placements, they got to tack up the pennant style banners, the flag banners, tack them up, and then 20 minutes later, the other van for the other major wholesaler, the major brand comes through and they rip down that one from the bar and they tack up theirs. And then, another hour later, the other team comes back. We literally, I watched it happen. The bar owners were just like, yeah, whatever. But anyways, so I'm getting sidetracked.
Yeah.
It
sounds like you didn't have a great time working with this Miller distributor.
Well, we weren't working with them yet. Yeah. And they said, we'll start with you in February. And then, almost like clockwork, about halfway through January, they said, you know what? Actually, a lot of our sales team is taking off time in February because January is so intense for us because of the Super Bowl. It's not going to be a good time. You won't get the attention or the focus. We should start with you in March. Okay, now we're really dying here. And again, almost like clockwork, in the middle of February, got a call, but this time it was a little different. I can literally remember sitting at my desk, picking up the phone, and sure enough, it was this person or contact on the other line, and he says, in essence, you know what? We've changed our mind. And at that moment when he said that, what I heard was, you know what? We're going to let your company die. And I still get a lump in my throat when I tell this story. I actually told this at the California Craft Brewers Conference last week on stage, and during a talk I was giving, and I literally started welling up, and my voice got quivery, and I was kind of starting to cry a bit. It's that visceral. I mean, it is that powerful just to take myself back. I mean, right now my arms, my hair's sticking up and on my arms, and it was the scariest. I mean, it was like the moment.
Yeah.
In my entire career that was the single worst moment. Pick a one. And I walked over to Steve's office, and he just looked up at me, and his eyes got wide because he could see it. And I told him about the phone call, and we were just like, oh, shit, what are we going to do? And we didn't think that we just didn't see a way out of it because we were, again, bleeding money so much. Well, as it turns out, March came. And March, the clouds parted, and the sun shone, and the angels maybe even sang a little bit, and we had our first break-even month. We had volume growth we just didn't anticipate. I mean, by today's standards, not so impressive, but it got us. I think we maybe even made a couple $100 that month, and then we would go above and below the break-even line over successive months and over the following year. But you could see the light at the end of the tunnel, and so fast forward. I guess we made it. So now, I'll fast forward from there a couple of years into it. Okay, so now we're established as a craft brewery that is self-distributing in San Diego County.
Right.
And we've gotten fairly good at it. We have a couple of refrigerator trucks now. And I think, okay, we're a craft beer wholesaler for realsies now. Well, if we're going to be a craft beer wholesaler for realsies, perhaps we should have other craft brands. And we have gotten to know and really like and respect a lot of different craft brewers, some of which are either doing it themselves and no doubt, having a really tough time making it profitable, not losing money. Some are not available in our region that we think craft beer fans like us would love. And so we started putting together a portfolio.
You built relationships with those like-minded retailers that were interested in your product and the beer that you made, and places where they could also convince consumers to take some risks on some of these things. But craft beer consumers are always an inquisitive bunch, and they want to try,
Yes, if you have enough, right? Yeah. But we didn't have enough.
Right.
We had, absolutely. The ones that were there in San Diego at this time, we're talking now late 90s, early 2000s, absolutely inquisitive and passionate, but volumetrically, not too many of them. But we would.
So it does make sense then to talk to some friends and talk to some folks that you're interested in working with potentially, and kind of slot them into that channel, because you're right, it's more efficient if you can sell 20 or 30 or 50 cases off of that stop instead of.
Oh yeah, we were maybe at the 20. That would have been a really good day.
Yeah.
I can remember that we were really trying to make our minimum delivery days minimum of 25 cases delivered.
Wow.
For the entire day.
Yeah.
But yes, we felt that if we drove, a wedge into the beer market, not just by ourselves, but with the help of our friends and compatriots in other breweries, that we could probably do a better job. We could reach more people. And so sure enough, at a typical liquor store, they might have a couple 6-packs of craft, and we'd talk them into, maybe making it 3 6-packs. And then we'd stretch out to maybe a shelf. And then we'd stretch out to maybe 2 shelves. And then a half a door. And then a full door. And then 2 doors. And that took probably that progression that I just, stated was probably a 2-year, at least a 2-year process. Step by step by step. Because if you gave them too much at once, and their consumer base didn't support it, you'd have old beer sitting there, and the retailer would lose faith in it, and you'd retrench, and you couldn't afford to retrench because there wouldn't have been a second chance. So you had to methodically do it step by step. And so now we are the largest independent craft beer wholesaler, I believe, in the United States.
I think you're right on that. What I've found interesting in today's craft beer world over the last few years, a number of small craft brewers, in the world of distribution, as you've seen, like there has been increasing consolidation, out there in that world of packaged beer and draft distribution. Some very large players have been gathering up all of the smaller family-owned distributors, and there are so many fewer channels for selling beer out there now than there used to be. But it also, that a new generation of brewers has kind of taken some inspiration from what really is your lead in that world and saying, hey, we're not going to depend on other people to distribute us. We're just going to go and do this ourselves and get it out there. And so in my state of Colorado, you've got Crooked Stave Beer Project with their Artisans distributorship. True Brewing has also launched their own distributorship. Up in Boston, you have Night Shift that has launched their distribution arm. And so a whole new generation of smaller and independent breweries are kind of using that playbook to say, we know we can't depend on these big corporate macro beer oriented guys to get our beer out there, but at the same time it's not efficient enough for us to just distribute our product out there.
Right.
And so to make that cost effective, let's all cooperatively do this together. But that really kind of started with you guys.
Well, actually it started with Brooklyn. They were doing their distribution division. The Craft Brewers Guild, as I think they called it, and that they later sold that.
Right.
And that was, we looked at them and we looked how they were doing that and said, maybe we could do that.
Yeah.
So we were not the first, but we eventually, continued in the game. We decided that it was something that was very important for us to keep and grow.
How much of your business today is that on a percentage basis?
Well, I can tell you that it's a significant part of our business.
Sure.
We have 140 trucks a day, almost.
Okay.
No, it's 120. It's 120 plus. I don't want to overstate it. But, trucks a day. Now, these are box trucks, refrigerated box trucks. I believe that we may have the largest refrigerated beer delivery fleet in the United States, which means that we probably have the largest refrigerated beer fleet in the world. Because the United States would, the way we treat beers, I wish the rest of the world treated beer as well as we've learned how to.
Yeah.
Right? Which is kind of mind-boggling.
Yeah.
We've grown to that position. But maybe in a way it's sad because we certainly don't have the largest beer delivery fleet.
Right.
But lots of beer deliveries still in the United States are not temperature control.
That brings up a good point. That's certainly one that I think about. If you get out there in the world of beer retail, there is a dangerously large amount of craft beer that is, sitting out at room temperature in a retail environment, or even worse, sitting out on the back of a distributor's warehouse in a unrefrigerated dock, for a day or two, and who knows what kind of, condition.
I don't want to diss room temperature. We design our beers to be able to withstand room temperature storage.
Sure.
We want it to be minimized.
Right.
And refrigeration is preferable, but it can withstand it. So sometimes there are retailers, that's simply just how they sell beer. There's even a couple of states where you still can't sell cold beer, I think.
That's true. I think, Utah is like that?
Yeah. So, yes, you can buy it, but no, you can't drink it yet. I'm not sure what's gained by that.
How do you design beer for that kind of shelf stability? Because, that's a specific challenge to make sure that beer, given those ingredients and considering those recipes, how that can withstand that time and present the experience that you intend for it for a consumer after it's been held at those kinds of temperatures.
Right. So I perhaps with my phrasing may have inadvertently suggested that we did something specifically for the warm shelf, when in fact it's simply making sure that you're packaging your beer with low airs,
right?
With great sanitization, and just great overall practices throughout the brewing process. So you end up with a really great quality in your canned, bottled, and kegged beer that can then withstand, the challenges, the real world challenges that are thrown at it.
Right.
I just got a local brewery here in Richmond gave our team some beers to say thank you for. We'd done some nice nod.
Right.
So team gave me one, and I took it back to my little Airbnb last night, and at the end of the evening decided to pop it open, and it was oxidized, and it was, I think, new. That was a little challenging, and it's a brewery that I would not dare name their name, and that's not the point. But it's a brewery that I have respect for and has a good reputation around town. And I drain poured it. I drank a little bit, and it was very good. I think it was a great beer, except for the fact that it had been oxidized.
So,
that's a bummer.
It's not an uncommon experience for me. In my role with Craft Beer Brewing Magazine, we receive quite a bit of beer submitted by breweries across the country. The rise of kind of hazy and more delicate hops characters, in these style of beers, has led to a bit more fragility in the beers themselves. And I've noticed, especially the summer, with very hot temperatures through the summer, that more beer was arriving to us in a pretty rough condition. Because when you ground ship something and it's sitting out on a UPS truck for 3 or 4 days crossing the country in 90-degree weather, it's going to get pretty warm out there.
Yeah, although it's probably not getting 90 degrees in the UPS truck or in the warehouse, because then, the chocolate bar that somebody is sending to a friend via the same system or whatnot, things will end up ruined, and UPS is going to hear from it. So I'm sure that they stored a little bit better. But even still, what that's suggesting is maybe that it's even worse for those beers, because what they're being subjected to is not so terribly extreme, but they're not even able to withstand some modest rises in temperature of, say, room temperature or room temperature plus.
Right. Well, a lot of wine shippers, and I will order wine online from time to time. They do temperature holds and won't ship, during these kinds of, hot, temperatures. Mm-hmm. In fact, I've still got an outstanding order for, some wine that hasn't shipped yet because they're just worried about shipping it. Mm-hmm. But beer, people tend to roll the dice a little bit more often on that. And nowadays you have folks that, buy beer at a brewery, drive it home, sits in a trunk, may get shipped out in some, interesting or questionable, conditions. That's all natural, and we can expect that to be a part of the beer world that we're in today. It has to be weird and interesting to see people review beer, though, and rate beer based on those kinds of experiences when there's a kind of questionable, custody to that beer.
Sure, that is true. But I think, for us at Stone, it goes back to one of the things I've been the proudest of over the years is that we have always ranked very well on the online ratings websites historically, and that's all real world experiences that are sometimes fraught with challenges along the way, whether it's the wholesaler, a little less likely these days, the retailer, sometimes that is the case, and the consumer. Hey, sometimes people don't know how to treat the beer themselves, and they leave it in the garage instead of at least bring it in the house. So that's if your beer can withstand less than perfect conditions and still come out tasting great, that's the holy grail, of course.
For sure. It's an interesting one. And since we're in Richmond, I can talk about it. Richmond, strangely enough, I think has been at this kind of forefront of a non-shelf stable, beer movement. And folks like the Answer and the Veil have come out with these heavily fruited, unre-fermented, still plenty of fermentable sugar kind of, beers with heavy fruit. And I'm not going to ask you to, opine on that, but it is an interesting one.
I don't mind.
That these, that this is a town now that has been known for very sweet, but also, breweries that are specifically telling, their consumers that this must be refrigerated, that, this will not last.
I think it's actually kind of cool. Now, you're right. These things can be fraught with some problems along the way, but these breweries and those two that you mentioned specifically, I have a great deal of respect and admiration for. I love their beers, and I hey, it's adding to the conversation about what beer can and should be, is able to be, and how to treat it and all of that. And it's nice to be balanced in the craft brewing industry with some of these. Like the world is made up of everything is a bell curve, and there's always going to be one extreme end and the other extreme end. And one extreme end is perhaps see some uber fresh. We certainly forwarded that with the Stone Enjoy by IPA concept. Now I think 4 years ago. I think it's cool.
I don't disagree with you there. It may, even if it's not my personal preference for beer to drink, I think what you say there and that it expands the idea of what beer can be, as long as you're educating the consumer to go along with that.
Yeah, I'm asked frequently, hey, what do you think about these hazy IPAs? And they're expecting a negative reaction from me. For some reason, I don't know, I got some reputation. And the truth is, I think some of them are absolutely awesome.
Yeah.
I have no problem with a beer being hazy.
You guys even make some of them.
We've made some hazy beers, going all the way back to the Stone 020202 Vertical Epic Ale.
Yeah,
it was originally hazy, quite hazy. So
I think if brewers find a way to connect flavors to people that enjoy them, and can do that in a way that's honest and transparent and fair about what it is, and then also be communicative and open about the way that they have to store and enjoy those, and everybody's on the same board, then I don't see a problem with that. I mean, we our milk will go bad if I leave it out, and we don't seem to be upset at milk producers that they don't make a shelf stable product just because beer has been entirely shelf stable, because the folks defining what beer has been for the last 100 years have large-scale, production processes that allow them to do that. Doesn't mean that that's the only thing. That it can be.
Well, on the other side, of course, there's whether it might be a Brett beer or some sour styles are extremely shelf-stable for a true, as a result of a true artisanal approach to beer, not just an industrialized approach. But hey, there's lots of fun stuff going on out there.
For sure. Let's talk a little bit about some of your recent I don't want to call them antics, but you have
okay, well, I think you just did. Now I feel like I have something to live up to here.
You all have filed suit against Big Beer.
Oh, that was definitely not an antic. I can tell you, that was not an antic. That is definitely an anti-antic. Now, I might have had a little fun.
There might have been a little bit of social media video antics. Sure, right. But tell me a little bit about that. You guys have taken aim at Keystone over their use of Stone.
Well, they took aim first.
Okay.
And that's the issue. Just, full stop. I mean, they started this. We had no choice but to get in there and say, hey, we've noticed this. In fact, we couldn't not see this happening, and we can't let it happen. We can't let you just do this because that's our trademark, that you're, here's what they did. That's how I would describe it. For years, they kind of were starting to, the back corner of our property, they were kind of cutting a little bit of a path. Like, kid cutting a path going to school. And you're like, okay, you want to say get off of my lawn, but yeah. Okay. And then eventually, one day, when they did this rebranding last year, it wasn't a path being cut back, across the back corner. There were tents set up and there was building going on. And they're like, no, this is our property. We can't put up with that. You can't do that. And so we're going to have to go through the legal moves to stop you and have you clear all this stuff out and correct the situation. And so that's where we're at right now.
Do you really honestly think that people are going to confuse your brand with an American light lager that's pitched at that discount, that side of things? Or
I can tell you factually.
Or is this a way to get out there and push a press cycle?
Oh, no, it's absolutely not the latter.
Okay.
Absolutely. No, because, look, I have engaged in semantics over the years, from time to time to have fun. And,
I've watched the videos of you driving a forklift or a bucket loader and smashing beer bottles. You've done your share of photo-ready press ops. But,
yeah, well, that was one thing over 22 years. Let's be cautious on how much attention we give. But in this particular case, trademark law requires a protect it or lose it, period.
Yeah.
So if your territory is encroached upon, you have to defend it. There is no choice, or you just give up your rights. And our trademark is valuable to us. It's our in the world of beer. The name Stone is ours.
Right.
Period. So, yes. And have people can people get confused? Yes, studies have shown they absolutely get confused, and we got to remember we're insiders here.
Sure.
Are you going to get confused? Am I going to get confused? Maybe less likely.
Right.
But there are lots of people out there that are just normal beer drinkers, and they hear the names and they think, oh, Stone, that's a name that's respected. Hey, this has the word Stone on it. This must be that thing that my friends or my colleagues. I mean, I could quiz you about any other product or service that you might sort of fringe know about.
Yeah.
And you find, cases where we'd be confused. It's like, somebody was eating a, one of those healthy bars or whatever for you, the other day. And I was really hungry. And he says, oh, I've got an extra one. Do you want one? And I looked at the brand name. And I said, well, actually, no thanks, because I avoid anything with the word healthy or natural in the name on the label. Huh. Because I've learned that, if they have the word healthy or natural, they're anything but. Right. So as a consumer, I think you have to be too skeptical.
Yeah.
I wish I didn't have to be as skeptical as I am, as I've learned to be as a consumer. And, not everybody is. There's a lot of very non-skeptical people out there, as our current political climate will tell you, who are willing to believe what they're being told.
Yeah, it's a good brand point. And, we part of what we do is we run a brewery workshop, accelerators for breweries and planning, those that want to launch breweries. And I tell this, to folks over and over again. When I look at data from consumers that we get, or even our own readers, people that are willing to read and subscribe to Craft Beer and Brewing magazine and are fairly engaged with craft beer, I can't tell you how many, in our recent best of beer poll survey of our consumers, how many answers we got that were things like, "What's your favorite beer?" Was Founders Two Hearted?
Oh yeah,
right. It's there is no beer Founders Two Hearted. It's Bell's Two Hearted or Founders All Day IPA. And yet this is an engaged consumer base that can make nuanced decisions about other things, and they are still making some pretty basic, kind of confusing things.
Oh,
And so
I have people
from a business perspective, we think people understand our brands in this specific way because we're close to those brands. But the way that individuals relate to those brands is far different than we relate to them.
I can't tell you how many times I've run into a craft beer newbie, and they'll say, "Oh, do you know this beer called Pliny?" And like, one, do I know it? Yeah, I'm familiar with it. I've known Vinny and Natalie since 1995, I think. But because they've heard of it. Right, and I remember a friend of mine, craft beer bar in downtown San Diego, when Sam Calagione's show was on, and they did the Bitches Brew episode.
Yeah.
And so he said to me shortly after that aired, he says, "I am tired of people coming in to my craft beer bar and saying, 'Do you have any of the Bitches Brew?'" People that he would never see at other times, and it's because they heard it. It's a buzzword. So that's how people can become confused when they hear just a tiny little bit of information. They don't really understand much about it. I mean, hey, I'm glad they're asking questions and seeking out. That's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
But you can see how easily they'll take a tiny bit of information and expand it into, a different scenario. Like that you might just run into a craft beer bar in downtown San Diego and get some of this Bitches Brew that they'd heard about on TV.
Right. Let's walk back a little bit. I have you talked about launching the business, launching Stone at a time when that first craft beer bubble was bursting. Since this most recent, rise in craft beer, got kickstarted in the early 2010s. People have been predicting its demise, and they predicted its demise when there were 1,500 breweries in the country, and then when there were 2,500 breweries. And now we're closing in on 7,000 breweries in the country right now, and we still haven't seen, this imminent demise that's coming. But I think there is still some feeling that something will probably shake out in the next decade because all things are cyclical, all business, experiences kind of ebbs and flows. What were some of the lessons you learned from that first difficult time as craft beer, kind of went through these struggles? And how were you able then, to apply some of those lessons to how you prepare for what it might be some cyclical downturn, in the future looking forward?
Yeah, so I can, I think about this. It makes me think of eucalyptus trees in San Diego. And when we have a couple of years in a row of a decent amount of rain, now, of course, our decent amount of rain isn't anybody else's, pretty dry, but,
right.
Decent amount of rain, and not having the high winds. We have winds that will blow in sometimes really strong, called the Santa Anas.
Right.
And from year to year, they can be quite different, and they can be vicious on some years. So you have a couple of years' worth of tree growth of these young eucalyptus coming up, and they're really healthy and just shooting to the sky, and there's not much wind. They haven't grown a necessary component to their structural character that allows them to withstand the wind. The wind kicks up, and there are trees down all over the place. Because in order to be healthy, strong structurally, you have to have some headwinds. You have to. And so, as we have seen some small brewers growing up over recent years with functionally no headwinds. I mean, they open up and they've got a line outside the door. They, are getting bloggers and they're getting newspapers, the local papers. I mean, the local paper never wrote about us, back in those days.
Right.
The media ignored it. So right now there's like disproportionate amount of attention. I love that. That's great. But be careful, guys, because if you don't have lean business practices, if you haven't been forced to be strong against some headwinds, it could be when the winds kick up, there's going to be some toppling, some branches broken at the least, and maybe the tree ball, the root ball comes out.
What are some of those lean practices? I mean, what are lessons you may have learned the hard way through this?
Well, we actually grew up in a lean time.
Yeah.
So, you can almost relate it to if you ever known anybody that grew up during the Depression.
Right.
It becomes part of their DNA. It
Yeah.
just becomes a normal part.
We've had a grandmother that stashed toilet paper under the bathroom sink because she wasn't sure she's gonna still have enough when she needed it.
Right.
Sure.
And you want enough toilet paper when you need
You
it.
do need it.
So, yeah, it's that kind of mentality.
Yeah.
So it's not one specific thing of just make sure you do X, Y, or Z. It's across the spectrum, and including with your consumers. I mean, like, how are you connecting with your fans? And what is the makeup? If it's just random people that have heard your beer's cool and they're supposed to come in on a Wednesday for a special release or something like that? Or is it true people who really understand what you're about and care about that thing? Because when the wind kicks up, those people that heard they're supposed to come in and get this, cloudy beer or whatever it is, they might not roll in the following week. The following week there'll be less, and then it'll be less, and you'll be like, what happened? Well, tides shifted a little bit. And it's just like the people that were coming into my friend's craft beer bar in San Diego asking for Bitches Brew. They, when that's not a thing anymore at the moment, they're not coming in the next week asking for something else. They're just not coming in.
Now, even at your scale, and even recently, you all maybe experienced some effect of that.
We are experiencing it, absolutely.
You hit a plateau, and you stopped growing for a little bit, and there was a little bit of a stutter for you all, and you have somehow over the last year and a half, 18 months, managed to get past that and actually grow volume again.
Well, we've grown every year.
Okay.
Yeah, we have grown every year. We haven't had a down year, and this year will not be a down year for us, and next year will not be a down year for us. But it has
there are
decreased.
There are peers, also at your scale that are
having down years,
or plateau years, and not growing in a significant way, or growing in a single digits when they've been growing in double digits. Right. It's not an uncommon story to hear out there that those tailwinds that were pushing everybody forward are maybe shifting a little bit and getting more dispersed across a bigger breadth of that. How your brands and craft beer, a lot of it is, again, built on that kind of inquisitive wanting to explore and try new things. The bigger a brand gets, the larger the challenge gets to make that something new and different and exciting for a consumer. How, as this business has gotten to the size and the scale that it is, do you continue to make that story interesting for consumers and keep attracting new ones to your brand?
By keeping it interesting for ourselves.
Yeah.
Ultimately, remember I used those 4 words, beer geek gone pro. It's got to apply today. If I lose my beer geek, or we lose at Stone our collective beer geekdom, then I can anticipate if we're not as excited anymore, how can we expect anybody else to be, as excited as they were?
Yeah.
So we do things that excite us. We constantly push forward. And like the very beginning, we've always taken inspiration from the world around us. We try not to copy. I don't think, you look at Stone and say we
Sure.
have a big reputation for being copycats. But being inspired by and motivated by and, just being creative. And that applies not only in the beers that we brew, but the other things that we do. For example, being the first American craft brewer to build, own, and operate our own brewery in Europe. Being the first American independent craft brewer to build our own place in China. I look at this as a creative endeavor. We are an artisan company. And the benefits of being artisan are that you get to behave like an artisan. You always have to have the business down too, right? No matter who you are, if you're just a solo painter or sculptor or something, you still have to have some business acumen to be able to get out there, promote yourself, get some showings, hopefully sell some pieces of art so you can buy yourself some top ramen or, pay for the warehouse space in which to create your art. And we like to treat not just our beer, but our restaurants and our endeavors as art. Like you can bring artistic aspects. Granted, is Stone Distributing or distribution company, is that an artistic endeavor? I can tell you, when you make sure, not me making sure, but our own team, they drive themselves. All of our drivers have passed the Cicerone, basic Cicerone. They're drivers. I don't think there's any other wholesaler out there that can say all their drivers have done that. These are people that want to bring that artistic side, that knowledge, the passion to what they do on a day-to-day basis. And so we have that kind of mentality that then pervades throughout the entire company. I think that puts us at an advantage because it's real.
And I love the art metaphor, but if you look at any artist, the further they get from the production of that art, and as things get bigger for you, then, the further removed you get from that. Or Andy Warhol, when his assistants started making all of his paintings, or Mark Kostabi, who was a modern artist who has an atelier of painters now painting his paintings for him, and he decides which ones he signs that become his art. Or Dale Chihuly, the Seattle glass artist, who is now facing a lawsuit from one of his ateliers who, claims that authorship in his work was taken. The bigger it gets,
sounds like you're pretty knowledgeable in that world. But
the bigger it gets, the harder it is to make that imprint. And how do you deal with that challenge?
So we didn't claim to be painters. Okay,
yeah.
So
that's your
originally, metaphor. Art is a metaphor, but
sure.
I think we have to. So something like a painting is highly personal to the person who is holding the paintbrush.
Doesn't have to be. But yes, that would be a traditional definition.
But if you're sort of having your signature on some of those, I think it damn well should be.
Sure.
Otherwise, I think I'll feel cheated.
Again, Warhol had his philosophy, and just like unrefermented juice type beers, it creates a different idea of what art can be, and I don't think that that's wrong. I think it's just something that challenges a typical, definition of that. But it does get harder, as this gets bigger.
It doesn't have to. So at Stone, look, when we created, Steve created Stone IPA recipe.
Yeah.
He was our main brewer at the time, and he did a lot of the brews, but not all of them. And as we then moved to Escondido and built our new brewery there, one thing we are all in agreement is like, wow, Stone IPA just took a notch upwards. Like it got better. We are very happy with the shift. You're concerned. You're going from a 30-barrel brew house to a 120-barrel. So then, it got better. And so we brew a batch of beer. Now can we brew another batch of beer? And now can we brew another batch of beer? And can you brew them to the same qualitative level as before? Well, if you make the qualitative level the defining factor that'll say, yes, we can do more, or no, we cannot do more, that's how you can maintain it. But and I've seen companies do this, not just in the brewing world, but in other kinds of companies, where they say, okay, we have orders that are 120% of our ability to make our product in the standard that we like to do it. You either do only 100% of what you can do within those standards, or you change your standards to pump out that 120%.
Yeah.
And so it's not changing those standards. So then that just becomes, it's a artistic decision, it's a business decision. For me, it's just as much a business decision, because I can see the downsides of changing to fulfill that 120% when you cannot hit your qualitative standards by doing so. And we can look at, it's a well-known story. And yes, it's the industrialized side of beer, but with Stroh. You know the Stroh story?
I'm not familiar with that.
Well, so historically, and I might get a little detail. I think there's a Harvard business case and whatnot. There's definitely been business cases and studies about this. But what happened was that they learned that if they modified the recipe ever so slightly, through testing, the people could not tell the difference, but they could save some money. So they did it. And then, once again, if they modified the recipe ever so slightly, they could save some more money. People could not functionally tell the difference. And after a few years of doing this, guess what happened? They ended up with goalposts from the original recipe to where they were at now.
Yeah.
And everybody could tell the difference.
Right.
But even though there wasn't that direct comparison, it wasn't available because they were, separated by a few years, consumers became less and less enamored. I don't know if people actually thought about it consciously. This isn't as good as it used to be,
Sure.
I don't find it as interesting as it used to be, or I just don't, whatever. However they reacted.
Right.
But the bottom line is they reacted by buying less. And at that point, the brand was dead. They killed themselves.
Yeah, you guys have done exactly the opposite of that, which I think is another interesting point. And you, over the last 2 years, have actually reformulated some of your core brands, like Pale Ale and IPA, to make those recipes fit what consumers expect from that brand now. That's a challenging move for a brewery of your size.
I can tell you it was very scary, but we felt it was the right thing to do because when we sat down and we did that side-by-side taste test, we agreed that the newer version, we liked it better. And so if you can look across, at ourselves, within yourself, or across at your colleague, across the table to your colleague, and say, I don't know, I kind of think this tastes a little bit better. I really like it. Then you feel compelled to go ahead and make that change. And it's a scary, and I think probably most companies would not do it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't speak for others.
It's an interesting point, and I think there's a question that lies there for me. Is a beer what the consumer expects from the beer, or is a beer the recipe for that beer? Because consumers change over time. Palates change. The inputs that we experience in our lives, everything that we taste, does have a way of kind of shifting our palate. And so we can, and we see this all the time, even among beer geeks rating things on the internet, to bring that back around. Sure. They're like, batch one was better. Well, of course batch one was better, because when you had batch one, you had different inputs in your palate. And so now when you try it again, you're not tasting it in the same kind of context. So as that context changes, it does seem like you all have made that decision to, just to adjust the beer so that it hits people in the same kind of way that it hit people when they tried it in those initial
ourselves,
times.
And we're people too. So we, so we wanted to hit ourselves that way. It's the mentality of let's not ever feel we are so special that we can't be better, that we are so awesome that we can't make something better. In fact, I feel very much the opposite way. Hell yes, I want it. Can we make something better? Something that we would feel is golden, and a sacred cow. Well, can we make that sacred cow incrementally better in some way? Then let's do it. It's not that difficult. Well, it can be, because there's three-dimensional world that we live in.
It's not that difficult if you're releasing a beer in your tap room. It's a little bit more difficult when you're brewing tens or 100,000 barrels of that beer and shipping it worldwide.
And that's why we communicated it.
Yeah.
We let people know. We said, hey, we're kind of excited about this change, but we want you to be aware there's a change. And it would be more typical in the beer industry and other industries to simply sneak the change in there.
Sure.
Which, hey, if you are benefiting the consumer, if you're sitting at your own tasting table saying, I think the new recipe or the modified recipe is incrementally or significantly better, then I think you're cheating no one, because you're being, the integrity behind it. But we decided to publicly kind of shout it out. Now, we didn't shout it out super, super loud for somebody who's, because you want to, walk carefully with that kind of thing.
Was it successful from a consumer perspective? Did you see sales increase for those after the changes?
Yes, we had some success with it. We ended up feeling that it was the right change to make. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and it depends. Like, Stone IPA was really, we called it 1.1. We did Ruination with the 2.0.
Yeah.
So, because we felt it was enough of a change to warrant a 2.0 version, versus the Stone IPA was really a fairly modest tweak, but we still felt it was our responsibility, and just we wanted to let people know, to share that information with them.
Well, cheers. Greg Koch, executive chairman of Stone Brewing, co-founder of Stone Brewing. Thanks for sitting down with me.
Are we done already? Boy, that went quick. The conversation flies.
That is an hour right now. We have gone 60 minutes on tape right now. But thank you for sitting down and talking with me here at the Stone Brewery in Richmond.
It's a pleasure.
Really appreciate your conversation. And people can find you on the internet at all the places that Stone is. How do they follow you personally?
Jumping off of trucks, off of bar tops, engaging in some kind of antics.
Is it more fun on your personal Instagram and social media? Or how do people follow you?
I am on Twitter, although currently on a hiatus. Okay. But I'm at Stone Greg on Twitter. And other than that, I'll just see you at the pub, at the tasting room, at Stone Berlin, Stone Shanghai, Stone Napa, Stone San Diego.
Cheers to that. If you've enjoyed this podcast, subscribe. You can find us online at beerandbrewing.com. You can find Beer and Brewing Magazine on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Subscribe to the magazine. We'd love to share stories, and you can see fantastic reviews of Stone beers from time to time.
We didn't even talk about our new collaboration with Metallica. Oh man, it is so cool. Damn it.
Metallica. All right. Well, that'll be a subject for another podcast. Cheers, Greg. Thanks. This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.